So you want to write a fugue. You've got the urge to write a fugue. You've got the nerve to write a fugue. So go ahead.
So you want to write a fugue. You've got the urge to write a fugue. You've got the nerve to write a fugue. So go ahead. So go ahead and write a fugue. So go ahead and write a fugue that we can sing.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Rockwell. What you are currently hearing is the opening of a composition by the Canadian pianist Glenn Gould titled So You Want to Write a Fugue, that he composed for the 1963 CBC TV program called The Anatomy of Fugue, a show about writing fugues. What's a fugue? A fugue is a type of musical composition that is primarily associated with the Baroque period in Western music, and the composer we associate with fugues above all others is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach composed a lot of fugues in his life. He was considered a master of that particular compositional form, and he was so much so that he could improvise them. The first thing you have to understand about fugues is that they're really cool. They're a type of process music, meaning there's a process involved in composing them, and that process is audible to the listener, which is part of the fun. They're like a musical jigsaw puzzle. To understand how they work, we're going to take a walk through a famous Bach fugue, known today as the Little Fugue in G minor. I shared a video of myself playing my transcription of it recently. It was originally composed for organ, and I arranged it for 3 guitars and bass and played all the parts. The only structural feature virtually all fugues have in common is the way they begin. So, let's go from the start. Okay, pause. What you just heard is the melody the entire fugue is going to be based on. This melody is called the subject. Fugues always begin with the subject played alone with no accompaniment. Now what's going to happen is another part is going to enter and it's going to play the subject while the first part is going to move on with other material. There's a few things to point out here. First, the second part enters in a lower register. It doesn't present the subject exactly the same way as when we first heard it. This second sounding of the subject is called a response, or an answer. An answer pretty much always happens in the key of the dominant. In this case, the initial subject was in the key of G minor. So the answer is in the key of D minor, a fourth below. In this fugue, the key completely modulates to D minor for the answer. But in some fugues, the answer might still start on the dominant, but the intervals might be altered a little so that it's still in the original key. That's called a tonal answer. But here, the key completely changes for the answer, so this is a real answer. Second thing, the top part moves on to counterpoint over the top of the second part as we hear the answer. Simply put, counterpoint is when there are 2 or more independent melodies sounding simultaneously, and there is a lot of concern for how the melodies are moving in relation to each other. This happens in all fugues. But let's listen to what the top part plays through here. We're going to be hearing the subject a lot more as the fugue continues, and every time we do, we're also going to hear that melody at the same time. That is what's called a counter subject. It's a counter melody that sounds alongside every subsequent presentation of the subject. Not all fugues have counter subjects, but the best ones do. If there is no counter subject, then the other part will play a melody that we just won't keep hearing as the music continues. Third thing, after the answer finishes, both voices move on into some material we haven't heard yet. That is called a bridge. It's leading us up to another presentation of the subject, but we need some transitional material to get us back to the original key. And then we hear the third part enter with the subject in an even lower register. That was back in the original key of G minor. If this was a 3-part fugue, that would be it for the exposition, but there's one more part. Because we just heard the subject in the original key again, we're going to hear another answer in the key of the dominant. Subject, answer, subject, answer. That much is called the exposition. Fugues always start with all the parts entering in a canon, gradually building out the full polyphonic texture. The exposition is the only part of a fugue that has a more or less prescribed structure. From here, all kinds of things can happen, but you can expect to hear the subject several more times. Now that it's been presented, we're going to hear it getting developed and chopped up and recontextualized. However, we're not going to hear it all the time. That little section is called an episode. An episode is just any part of a fugue where the subject is not heard or where we don't hear it in its complete form. The roadmap is basically subject, episode, until the composer decides to wrap things up. Episodes are usually transitional in some way. They're full of melodic sequences, which is where you hear the same melodic fragments stepping up or down through the key. This next little bit is still kind of an episode, but we also very clearly hear the subject. There we hear the subject start in the tenor part, divert into some other material, and then pick up again in the soprano part. And when it picks up again, the bass part sustains a long note on the dominant. We're in G minor right now, so it's holding out a D. That's called a pedal tone. When played on the organ, it's played with one of the foot pedals. That's where the term comes from. Over the top of it, we hear the subject in the soprano voice and the counter subject in the tenor voice. Here we go on into another episode with more sequences that are serving to change keys. And now we get another presentation of the subject in the alto voice, but now it's in the key of B flat major, which is the relative major to G minor. All the intervals in the subject and counter subject are adjusted to fit in a major key. Then another episode with more sequences. In Baroque counterpoint, imitation and dialogue are the name of the game. The two voices that we hear in this episode trade the gestures they're playing halfway through. They're imitating each other. It's conversational. But it also creates a clear contrast. The parts are in two different registers, so when the gestures do this, it jumps out at you. This next part is texturally one of my favorite moments in the whole fugue. We're going to hear the subject in B flat major again in the bass voice, but the tenor and soprano voices are both going to come in with the counter subject in harmonized counterpoint off of each other. Now we go into another episode with a big long sequence We're about 2/3 of the way through the piece, so we're starting to build to some climactic stuff. You may have noticed that up to this point, we haven't really had any moments where all 4 parts are playing simultaneously. Well, here you go. On an organ, dynamics aren't achieved through touch like they are on a piano. The same is true of the harpsichord. So in Baroque keyboard music, a lot of which was played on one of those 2 instruments, the way to create the sensation of being louder is to simply play more notes at the same time. Thicken up the texture, push out more sound. Coupled with the fact that the soprano voice is way up in the stratosphere playing its highest notes yet, you get the biggest, most exciting section of the fugue so far. And this whole episode serves to bring us back to the subject in a minor key, this time in the key of C minor. Why C minor? To G minor, C minor is the subdominant, or the 4. That's a typical move for Bach, and a lot of music across different style periods in general. Hit the 4 when you're getting ready to build to a dominant chord that's going to bring the whole thing home. That's exactly what's going to happen in the next episode. We'll hear some more melodic sequences, and before the final iteration of the subject, there will be a big climax with some really tense harmonies. Despite being in the key of G minor, the piece ends on a G major chord. That's called a Picardy third. If your piece is in a minor key, you end it on the parallel major chord. It's a pretty standard move in Baroque music, as well as a lot of classical and some romantic music. The point is to have a more positive, resolute sounding ending. To a lot of modern ears, it does sound a little bit funny, but it's part of the style. So there you go. That's a fugue. This was just kind of a drive-by analysis of it to highlight the structural elements. We didn't even get into talking about all the intricacies of the counterpoint going on. There's a lot of moving parts, and the way they move against each other is bound by rules that Bach was deeply familiar with. Again, Bach could improvise these things, and it's said he was able to improvise a fugue on any subject. But as far as fugues go in general, this one is not terribly complicated. There's all kinds of other techniques that can be employed in fugues to develop a subject, like augmentation and diminution, where you present the subject at half speed or twice as fast without changing the overall tempo. You can also put it in its inversion, where all the intervals are flipped upside down. With this fugue's subject, that might sound like this. Or retrograde, where you reverse it. This fugue doesn't do those things. They're not a requirement. And if a fugue utilizes those more complicated techniques, that doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Never be clever for the sake of being clever, for a canon inversion is a dangerous diversion. A bit of augmentation is a serious temptation. Try splendid invention is an obvious solution, while a striking diminution is a very, very obvious.
So never be clever for the sake of being clever, for the sake of showing off.
Fugues are an interesting intersection between intellectual methods and artistic intuition. When writing one, you can lean towards a stricter, methodical approach, keeping true to the rules. You can use the rules as a basis and deviate from them, or you can find some medium between them. But you can do that with any musical form. 12-tone music, a 12-bar blues, a 32-bar song form, a classical sonata, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. All of those have a method involved. Because the intellectual process in writing a fugue is so audible, they're a sort of left brain stimulant. But if the composer has any artistic intuition, it will still be enjoyable to listen to. The Little Fugue in G minor is often listed among people's favorite Bach fugues, and I believe a large part of that is because the subject is so good. It's a total earworm. It has an exciting melodic contour, and it has a mix of slow and fast rhythms. Every time you hear this, it jumps right out at you in a texture that is otherwise busy with continuous 16th notes. Fugue is only as good as its subject. So why did I arrange this old organ fugue for a bunch of guitars? Short answer, because I felt like it. I've always loved the piece, and I thought splitting the parts onto 4 different instruments would bring more attention to the clever interplay between them that might not always be as apparent when it's all played on one instrument. But as I was working on it, I remembered just how much you can learn about your instrument by studying the music of Bach. One of the biggest challenges when playing his music on guitar is working out how you're even going to play it. What positions you'll play in, what fingerings you'll use, where you'll shift positions, picking directions, all of it. And then you have to get it all right to a T, because any bad notes in Bach will sound like a car crash. It's all just amazing for developing your technique and musical sense, and it's just beautifully composed music besides. So I've made my transcription available in my store so you can explore this music yourself. You get a lot of bang for your buck. It includes PDFs of the full score, all the individual parts with and without tablature, and all my fingerings, exactly as I played them on the recording. You also get high-quality MP3s of the full recording, stems of each part solo, backing tracks with each part removed so you can fill in the missing part, and a tempo-mapped click track. And if you buy the print version, you still get all of that. This has the score and parts all bound together. You don't have to imitate my guitar and tone combination. You can do whatever you like. With Bach, the notes are so good, it doesn't matter. If you decide to take the plunge, I hope you enjoy exploring this music. I also have a variety of exercise books available. Purchasing any is a great way to add some structure to your technique practice, as well as support the creation of future videos like this. And if you're ever interested in one-on-one Zoom lessons with yours truly, don't hesitate to reach out. That's all for now. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.
We're going to write a fugue. We're going to write a good one.